Today I'm chatting with Polly, one of our clients, who is living in London, and her dad is living in Dublin and is cared for by one of our live-in carers. Hello, Polly.
Hi there, Tom.
How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Yes, very well.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining me. Polly, can I ask you, what were the circumstances that led you to contact AL Home Care?
Well, I have to look after my father remotely. I'm based in London. He's based in Dublin. He's been incredibly self-sufficient and looked after himself since my mother died 3 years ago, and had been doing very, very well. But I recognized, particularly, I think, after lockdown and the isolation he experienced in that period, that his health had deteriorated a lot. And in early 2021, I felt concerned about him and thought actually he needed somebody living in. One of the things that happened, which I think is just a very common occurrence, was he had a couple of falls. One of them happened in the garden, and actually he lay in a flower bed for half an hour and just was very, very vulnerable. And I thought, actually, he needs somebody living in now, somebody who's looking after him and knows what he's doing all the time and can sort of keep tabs on his activity, because he is actually still very mobile and very out and about. He loves his garden. He's got a sizable house. And I thought, very important for him to stay in his own environment and have somebody come in to take care of him. And I had heard about AL Home Care through another one of your clients who had used you and recommended you. So I got in touch and started the process of trying to find somebody that I felt would be suitable to live with my father and look after him in a much more 24/7 way.
So what has it been like having a live-in carer from AL Home Care?
Well, we've been very lucky because I think we got a really, really good person first time. And I know that's the whole business of how you relate to people can be very, it can be very difficult, and getting somebody that was going to work well with my dad and get on well with my dad. We hit a bit of a bullseye in the very first carer that we interviewed on Zoom. I really liked her, and then I did an interview with my father and with her, and we appointed her at the beginning of the summer. And actually, it's been really very, very good. She's settled in very, very well. She's very good with my dad. My dad, I would say, in many ways, was very open to the idea. I think he recognized his own vulnerability. But I do still think the carer that we did get, it has, I would say, a lot of emotional intelligence and has been very good at fitting in with the household and respecting my father, who is, as I say, still quite mobile, still quite independent. So actually, we've been very lucky, and I think my father has really helped in being very open to it, which I know is not always the case.
Polly, what advice would you give to a family who might be considering care options at the moment for an elderly relative?
I think a really important aspect of all of this is understanding what will work for the person that you need looked after. I think if that, a small anecdote, but my father's brother, my uncle, who I was very, very close to, needed care in London. And actually, it was extremely difficult. He resisted everybody that I suggested and recommended. And that was very, very hard. So I think people have to be incredibly patient, incredibly understanding of the individual's desires and what kind of person is going to work for them. I think the other thing is sort of doing that, giving a little bit of space for the carer to get to know the individual they're caring for, but also giving that carer an awful lot of support, encouragement. There can be very difficult periods with carers and patients, clients. And I think it takes a lot of patience and understanding. But I would also say personalities are very, very important. And if you feel those personalities are not gelling, usually you're right. And it might be that it's not quite the right person. And don't be deflated, because there will be somebody who's right. And most times you'll get it right, because you'll do the process, the interview, get to know them a little bit. I would definitely recommend really properly thought through interviews. And if you're the person choosing the carer and you don't think interviewing is your skill set, then ask around. There might be another family member you can involve in that interview, somebody who might be a little bit better at asking the right questions, possibly even talking to our home care to say, have you got a list of key questions that you could use as prompts? I think interviewing is a skill and some people are not as good at it. And I think asking the right questions will really help you get to the right person. So I would recommend that too. And just be patient.
And finally, Polly, a lot of elderly people would resist the idea of having a live-in carer coming and living in their home. And I know you said that your dad was very much on board with the idea. What advice would you give to a family who might be dealing with a situation where their elderly relative is resisting the idea?
I mean, I always think it's quite good to sort of set up some scenarios that might, I don't want to use the word might frighten the elderly person, but I always think it's very good to position what could happen if they weren't open to this. So I think people being cared for in their own home is much, much better for them. And I think most elderly people want to stay at home. But I think sometimes being able to help them understand that if they resist it, they may have to go into a care home. They may have to be moved out of their house because somebody does need to look after them. And I think sometimes being able to very gently story tell about examples where somebody, wasn't able to stay at home because they resisted a carer might be a nice way of setting it up in a very gentle way. I think the other thing is it really helps for a family member to be involved. So when I got the carer that we got for my father, I went to Dublin and I spent 10 days in the house with the carer and with my father. And what I think really helped was he could see that I really liked the carer and we built a relationship, and he was able to kind of, in a funny way, mirror that. And I was able to help to bring my father into a good space with the carer and broker that relationship. I think the idea that you put a stranger into an elderly person's home and just hope it'll all work is a bit of a fallacy. I think you do have to invest the time to give the carer support, but also to give your parent or your loved one the support. So I think an integration program is really important. I think it's really important to have touch points with the carer. Again, you can't just leave them and expect it all to be right. You've got to help them understand what your loved one's needs are, the kind of behavior that they're used to. It might be that you've got an elderly parent or family member who's quite formal and needs to have that formality respected. Or it could be someone who needs a hug every once in a while and needs to feel connected. So I think it's about really trying to broker that relationship, because only you will know. The clever carer will learn quickly, but they need support and they need help to kind of build that relationship. So I recommend just put the time in and don't leave the carer to work it out for themselves, because if you leave them alone, bad things can start to happen. If you're there, you can then negate difficult challenges and help both sides.
Well, Polly, you've been great to take time out of your day to talk to me today, and I'm sure the families who are listening to this podcast will be delighted that they took the time to listen today and that they will benefit from learning from your experience. Thank you,
Great.
Polly.
Pleasure, absolute pleasure. Delighted to talk to you, Tom. And, I think it's such a important way of looking after elderly people, keeping them out of care homes as much as they can, not because care homes are bad places, but just I think people do better in their own home if you can make that work. So I'm a great believer in it, and it's worked very well for my dad so far. So that's great.
Brilliant, Polly, and long may it last.